Mountain laurel once grew in abundance along the Patuxent River when the native people whose name it bears came up from the Chesapeake Bay to hunt and fish. White settlers arrived in the 17th century, lured by the richness of the land and the easy access by water. They claimed the area for themselves. Later, they would name their town Laurel. Situated between Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., the settlement grew rapidly into an economic crossroads for trade and a thriving cultural community. The river, once a deep, navigable body of water, played a major role in Laurel's history. Laurel's mayor, Joseph Robinson, explains.
The Patuxent River, as it flows through Laurel, is the reasoning that Laurel's here today. This is the end of the Piedmont, about 5 miles away from west of Laurel to where Route 1 is today. The river drops about 108 feet. And that droppage makes the water move fast, as you can hear or see in the background here. That's what brought the factories to Laurel.
The river was dammed so that water was held in a reservoir about 30 feet deep. This water power ran the great turbines of the cotton mill and later the Avondale flour mill. The cotton mill could run up to 8 hours on one reservoir of water.
And when 500 people came to work here, that created demand for services, for stores, for churches, for improvements to the roads. And therefore, that created the administration or the city of Laurel. One of the major products of the Laurel cotton mill was duck, and that was used as canvas, and it was used for the Baltimore Clippers, that the ships coming out of Baltimore. At one time, the state of Maryland furnished over 80% of the duck in the United States, and quite a bit of that come out of the Laurel factory. And that was also used back in the 1860s during the Civil War. They used this duck for canvas, for making materials for the Union Army.
Laurel was founded by Richard Snowden, whose grandson Nicholas built the mill, which was run by his sons-in-law, Dr. Theodore Jenkins and Mr. Horace Capron. Snowden was an ironmonger in Wales before coming to America to claim 10,000 acres of Maryland. As the mill grew and iron parts continued to be needed, the Divens Foundry was begun. A major machine shop made items for industry from iron and other metals. As more power was needed to run the mill, manufacturing moved northward to New England, but by then Laurel was a thriving community. It became the largest city in Prince George County, since most of the rest of the county was agricultural. Laurel formed its own fire department, police department, water supply, and electrical supply, fueled by coal, long before other towns had the need or the means for such sophistication. Laurel's geographic situation was helped not only by the river, but its central location between two major cities.
And many people for years called it the halfway town because it was halfway between Baltimore and Washington. And they built hotels here back for the stagecoaches. They changed the horses, and the people would stay overnight, and then the journey on to Baltimore, Washington the next day.
Racing was part of the life of a prosperous community. There was flat racing through the present day, harness racing, and an unusual automobile racetrack made of wood. After the day-to-day work of providing a living and a roof over one's head, people needed entertainment and excitement in their leisure time. During the early part of the 20th century, life in Laurel was easygoing, but with a certain small city bustle that made it unique. Third-generation Laurelite Elwood Fisher remembers his childhood.
Laurel Racetrack was started in 1911. It started as a fair before that. They only raced for years 25 days a year at Laurel. But back in the early days, it was a big affair because some people would rent their house. A lot of people rented their rooms, and then the ladies at all the churches would have suppers, and being October, they had these great oyster suppers, and I can see my mother and my aunts now patting oysters by the hour, patting oysters for these great oyster suppers. Now, to give you an example about what the traffic was on US 1 at that time, that was the only route. There was no 95, no 29, no parkway. So from Maine to Florida, US 1 was the main thoroughfare. So they came right through Laurel. And I think that was the abutment right there at the Patuxent on US 1 where Babe Ruth hit his car there. And as I said, I was about, I guess, 8 or 9, and I had my eyes wide open. He was at Bob's garage, either waiting for somebody to pick him up or waiting for the... And I remember just vividly him eating 6 hot dogs, and down on that was 6 bottles of homemade bootleg brew. And I recall that. I never did forget that. On my grandfather's place was at the foot of Prince George's Street, where the livery stable and undertaking establishment was. But I neglected to say there was a hotel called Osmond's Hotel between 201 Main Street and the Patuxent Bank. And they sold a cough syrup called O&O cough syrup. And I used to run over there. I don't know if they sold many bottles, but I know they made it in the bathtub. I recall seeing that. One of my most interesting memories was in the Armistice Day Parade. I recall 2 years running where there were 4 soldiers from the war between the states. But I do recall there were 3 Union soldiers and 1 Confederate, because I was, at that age, I thought they should all be Confederates.
To meet the influx of people, Laurel created new modes of transportation, beginning with the early stagecoach line, when there were 4 stages daily and a trip to either city took about 6 hours. In 1884, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad built a Queen Anne-style passenger station in Laurel, which has been in continued use ever since. The railroad connected Laurel to every city with a train station and made the trip north to Baltimore and New York a matter of hours. In the 1920s and 30s, as many as 34 trains picked up and discharged passengers each day. So much traffic went to Washington, D.C. that between 1902 and 1925, a trolley car service ran there from Laurel. On the 20-mile trip to 15th and New York Avenue in the District of Columbia, the fare was 1 cent per mile. As with any community that becomes well-to-do, Laurel began to build not only new streets and shops, but a new way of life. Churches are the first sign of a family community and are the center for cultural activity. Social, choral, and dramatic groups have flourished in the churches of Laurel. The first church in Laurel was an old stone Methodist meeting house built in 1842, followed by St. Mary of the Mills Catholic Church, still in use today, but greatly enlarged. St. Mary's bell is still rung each day, morning, noon, and evening for the Angelus. The bell once hung atop the Laurel cotton mill. St. Philip's Episcopal Church was built in 1848. Its bell once hung in the belfry of St. Paul's in Baltimore and rang September 11, 1811, to warn Baltimore of the approach of the attacking British. St. Mark's Church was built of hand-molded cement blocks. Today, there are more than 30 churches and synagogues in Laurel. Laurel was not just a working town. The people were culturally aware and demanded the best. Writer and retired editor of the local newspaper, the Laurel Leader, Miss Gertrude Poe comments on Laurel's cultural life.
Laurel's rise from Milltown to engaging suburbia without losing the personality that seems to have drawn and captivated the growing population is an interesting saga. That it has always nurtured cultural pastimes and advantages is not insignificant to its progress. The town's literary and dramatic societies and concert groups were so fluent that as early as 1879, they built an imposing 2-story hall to accommodate them, and they called it the Academy of Music. The Academy of Music was the scene of many notable and interesting gatherings. Cotillion dances were very popular there, and receptions for visiting dignitaries. Unfortunately, the Academy of Music was destroyed by fire in 1917.
Laurel's cultural history is filled with music. Concerts have been a part of the town's life. Horace Capron entertained President Zachary Taylor in the town assembly room.
In June 1907, the leader carried a photo of the 25-piece Laurel military band, which was led by Professor H.H.W. Tees. On more than one occasion, it wrote, "The band has displayed its generosity to the people of Laurel, and during the summer months it gives 2 concerts weekly at Montgomery and 4th Streets, which does much to enliven the summer evenings."
An internationally known bandmaster, Lieutenant Colonel Chester Earl Whiting, U.S. Army, resided in Laurel during the 60s and 70s. He was the founder of the U.S. Army Field Band. Chet Whiting taught young people the excitement of band music, using many of his own compositions. Dance is another part of Laurel's musical history. The Central Maryland School of Ballet resides on Main Street. The Laurel Oratorio Society was founded in 1969, and the Laurel School of Music began in 1988. Local talent has also been showcased at Petrucci's Dinner Theater and the Burn Bray Theater in Burtonsville. Because of its rapid growth and interest in education and the arts, Laurel had many firsts in its existence. In 1910, it had the first library in the county, the first public high school in 1899. The Laurel Building and Loan Association was established in 1868 and was the first of its kind in the state. The Citizens National Bank housed the first national bank in Prince George County in 1890. It has the first historic district in the county. Other firsts include indoor plumbing and the first school cafeteria. There was also the first and only garage between Baltimore and Washington, Frederick's. As an integral part of such a varied history are the buildings which housed the people and events that made Laurel what it is now. The architecture of the city is one of its strongest artistic legacies. In 1919, Dwight D. Eisenhower and his wife rented a room in Laurel while Eisenhower was stationed at Fort Meade. The Snowdens built many beautiful mansions, none more lovely than Montpelier, an 18th century plantation now preserved by the Maryland Park and Planning Commission and the Friends of Montpelier. The building's graceful Maryland design and gracious interior bring back the past. Mill workers could rent homes for $1.25 per month. These stately homes of quarried granite are still known as the Grand Old Ladies of Main Street. Victorian houses abound in the area, as do fine examples of the early 20th century. It has the greatest concentration of 19th century architecture in the county. Protecting the artifacts and information from the past has been the task of several organizations, most notably the Laurel Bicentennial Commission and the Laurel Historical Society and Museum. The past is only one facet of Laurel. The future has arrived. A new community is being formed as more families move into the town, bringing their own cultural and financial benefits to an already unique suburban population. Ivy Hill Cemetery is a good example of how the community of Laurel works together. This historic land has graves from the early 1800s. Headstones were overturned and overgrown with vegetation. In the 1970s, the Volunteer Fire Department began a cleanup operation, joined by the American Legion and the Masonic Lodge. Ivy Hill is now well cared for with new roads and commemorative plaques to thank its many supporters and the workers who restored it. The Laurel Museum is housed in an 1830 mill workers' house, which was renovated for the Laurel Historical Society and the Laurel Riverfront Park Interpretive Center. The city of Laurel is proof that preservation and progressive development can work together in an atmosphere of cooperation.